That same day, Jesus went out of the house and sat by the lake. Such large crowds gathered around him that he got into a boat and sat in it, while all the people stood on the shore. Then he told them many things in parables, saying, a farmer went out to sow his seed. As he was scattering the seed, some fell along the path, and the birds came and ate it up. Some fell along rocky places where it did not have much soil. It sprang up quickly because the soil was shallow, but when the sun came up, the plants were scorched, and they withered because they had no root. Other seed fell among thorns, which grew up and choked the plants. Still other seed fell on good soil, where it produced a crop, 160 or 30 times what was sown. Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear. I went driving with the kids today because sometimes you just got to get out of the house. And we were listening to Freddie, and we were kind of talking about what was going on and what was coming up tonight. And I was like, hey, let me read you guys this story and just kind of, you tell me what it's about. And if you guys have some good ideas, maybe you can come on during church tonight. We can have a conversation. I was like, man, maybe I'll read this to them and they'll have some amazing, insight or whatever. So I read it to him. And the first time through, Huck, I'm halfway through, and he goes, it's about pigs, which are not mentioned anywhere in the parable at all. And then I started reading it again, and June faded out and immediately started talking about the dress on one of her dolls. And I was like, okay, let's try it one more time. So I made it all the way through, and it was dead silent. And Huck goes, I think it's about the sun. And we decided that we don't have ears to hear, and that's okay too, because Jesus doesn't say everyone should always have ears to hear it. So I think what we're going to do, and this started as a great conversation on Tuesday, is start with sort of the framing of parables. For those of you that haven't been around, these have been a major part of the way that we do spirituality for a long time. We've had a group for a long time called Pints and Parables, and the idea of parables, stories like this about the farmer, is not that they have an answer, but that they have the questions that we need the most, and that they have unique ways of getting into us and getting behind our defense mechanisms, and exposing us to ourselves. So we started by sort of, at Occupy, we started by talking through probably more traditionally spiritual interpretations of this. Heather brought up initially, when we read this, we tend to see ourselves, and we do this with a lot of parables, we tend to see ourselves as the hero. And so when we first read it through, typically at first glance, we're the good soil, right? Or we're asking the question, how do I become the good soil? And so we're reading it with the assumption that the goal is to be good soil. Rather than asking questions like, how do I become an indiscriminate farmer? Or is soil changed by seeds, which are a couple questions we'll get to later. Heather brought up the great point that when we read these, our initial, maybe this is neoliberal capitalism or the American dream or just the modern Western ego, but we hear ourselves in the hero role. We're the good seed. And so we sort of frame the parable that way most times, which I kind of said, this leads me back to some of the reflections we made around Christmas. We said, Jesus is not Luke Skywalker, he's Yoda, that in our tradition, Jesus is not the hero, he's the guide. He doesn't do the thing for us. He's the one that shows us how to live, and we find life in that. Yeah, exactly, Annabelle, the farmer. So many questions for the farmer. We're gonna get to that. But that got me sort of thinking the hero and guide thing. If there is no hero in this story, if we're not supposed to read this through the lens of there being a hero or a right, where might the guide be in the story? Where is the guidance? What's up, guys? I'm in the middle of the sermon. What's going on? Hey, this is live. Can you ask the question? Because people are wondering what's going on. Stand by just a second. What's going on? You can have some milk as soon as I'm done, okay? Give me a few minutes. Thank you. Yeah, like 10 or 15. Jay immediately jumped in after that. Jay said, part of this is recognizing that it's not that I'm one kind of soil or another kind of soil, but that all of that soil's in me. And he said he recognized from experiences with recovery and stuff that very often, the seed, like the seed that is strong early and then is out of gas or whatever. And Jay's point is you got to think through where you send your message, where you spend your efforts, where you put your energy. And that is a lot of our modern Western sort of efficiency framework. Somebody else brought up this question. And I know I'm just peppering these at you because again, there's not a coherent sermon where I tell you what this means. I'm telling you all of the different things that this brings up in us. Somebody asked, what about when you've planted in fertile soil and it still dies? I mean, man, that could be the whole sermon, right? I mean, just especially in 2020, what about when you planted in fertile soil and it still dies? I mean, that's like, we're looking at this going, man, we thought we planted collective in fertile soil. We thought we planted the Drika Theater in fertile soil. We thought we planted the mission and the work and the good stuff of this congregation in fertile soil. And in a lot of ways, we're like everyone else in the world. We're sitting here looking, what happens when you think you've planted in fertile soil and things still don't work out the way that you thought they would? Oh man, Annabelle with the truth here. Some seed can only germinate after being digested by birds. Sometimes we got to be bird shit, I guess, to grow. Who knows? So then Dottie jumps in and kind of downshifts into this like really, really cool stuff from her background. She says, she'd heard it before. She says, when I hear this, I'm the soil and there is a seed coming to me. Grace, yes, life can get kind of shitty. Dottie says, I'm the soil and the seed is coming to me. And she said, what I can do, and this we're going to get back to the Serenity Prayer in a minute, what I can do is I can do stuff to the soil. And then we started asking, so what are the practices? How do we feed the soil? How do we prepare the soil? How do we check the soil? How do we adjust the soil? And then Kenny, brilliant, we got to go through it before we can grow through it. We don't control the outcome. Man, you guys are, so this is great. I'm preaching on this side of the screen and everybody else is over here preaching on this side, this is collective. This is what we've been going for, isn't it? So Kenny brought up the dangerous side of this parable, which is, and as soon as he said it, I was like, oh man, I had youth group flashbacks, that this is also a form of social control, right? Where religious leaders will say things like, you are the seed, plant yourself in a community you'll prosper in, right? Plant yourself with plant yourself with the right people. Make choices about good friends, right? And this sounds like religion, this sounds like parents, which we get, right? They want us to prosper and succeed. Oh, Rajni, look at this. A Sanskrit saying, we're each a part of the seeds and the seeds are a part of each of us. Seeds hold the past, present, and future lives beyond our comprehension. Gorgeous. Really, really beautiful. Thank you for that, Rajni. And so one of the things, thinking along the lines of what Kenny was saying with social control is that very often if we use this parable in this way, we end up, rather than with the kind of ecosystem that's pictured in the story, where there are different kinds of soil and different responses, we end up instead with an echo chamber where we isolate ourselves in similar groups. And so we only ever hear the same things and we're not challenged by difference. And then Jim, of course, man, Jim Kane came with it this week. He came back to where we started, which is the seed isn't really in charge of anything, right? It's in charge not of where it lands. And in a sense, that's an invitation to gratitude. And I want to pause for a second and actually lead us in this very, very brief gratitude practice, because this is what I got from Jim. If we are among the group of people who can tune in to something like a Facebook Live to participate in a congregation of spiritual people who have similar values and want to see similar goodness in the world, and we have the means to do this through Zoom and social media, then we should reflect on the fact and be grateful at how good the soil is that we fell into. And I think a lot of times, when we're trying to make the parable about becoming something, we miss the gift. We miss the simple gift. We miss just the gratitude of the fact that our seed fell in the soil that won us the lottery, right? Especially those of us that are white, that are male, that are straight, that have every advantage. Sometimes the spirituality isn't a story that's trying to tell you to change and become something. Sometimes it might just be the reflection that we got really, really fortunate to have fallen in the soil that we fell in. Jim goes on, Quakers, since the time of George Fox, have used this word seed, and for a long time it's been synonymous for some with that of God in everyone. That's like a very Quaker phrase. The seed is that of God in everyone. The potential for goodness that's in others. And sort of the Quaker call then is that we're charged with recognizing that seed. We're charged with recognizing that of God in everyone. I'm going to say that a couple more times, and I'm going to ask you to think about social media and politics when I say it. We're charged principally with the task of recognizing that of God in every one. We're charged with the task of recognizing that of God in every one. The seed is the spark of potential, which is somewhere deep down in the unknown. It's the mystery in every person, but our conviction is that it's there, that there is a seed of goodness. The seed contains the idea of a small buried thing. And this is all through Jesus, all through the Gospels, all through the kingdom of God imagery, is that it's a small thing buried that has huge potential for change, for development within it. In the point of this, the reason to run through this list is these are all good readings. These are all valuable perspectives. These are all helpful reflective frameworks, meaningful tools for listening and contemplation. There isn't a meaning for this. Again, because we don't read parables, they read us. And so I'm just going to share briefly before we wrap up the one that has read me the closest this week. And this is sort of where I am. And again, oh, who said it? But that's hard. Yeah, damn right, Annabelle, but that's hard. Man, okay, I got to pause then. Thanks for jumping on this, Annabelle. So yeah, so I got to do this wedding last night for a Jewish groom and a Christian bride, and I got to do this ceremony that kind of built a bridge, this cool interfaith wedding, and it was one of my favorites. And at one point, I had to summarize what I thought was the story of like the Judeo-Christian tradition, right? The Hebrew Bible and the Christian. So I said this, and this is kind of how I tied it to the wedding. I said, here's the summary of the story. Love is real. Love compels us to make commitments larger than ourselves, and commitments are really, really hard. That's the story, guys, as close as I can nail it down. And that's what Annabelle said, but this is hard. Yeah, exactly. Because love is real, and love will always compel us to commit larger than ourselves, and commitment is really, really hard. Absolutely, that's it. So here's, and I'll tie it back in a second. So the parable, the way this is working on me this week is the parable of the judgment of the soil versus the parable of the unconditional farmer. And I think this is what it means for me, that it can be read, and I borrowed some of this from Nadia Bolz-Weber, who reflects beautifully on it, that the parable can be read either in joy or in judgment. Let me try and explain this to you based on, I read this article recently about, it made so much sense of the creation story to me. Again, this is not the meaning of the creation story, but this is a reading of it. And the article essentially said this, that the garden in the beginning, what the imagery was trying to set up was this. There's one tree that's the knowledge of good and evil. The knowledge of good and evil is that we get to know what's right and wrong. And then the other one is called the tree of life. And I hadn't ever unlocked the tree of life thing. I just kind of let it sit there because it's a nice tree. And the guy in this article said the tree of life represents knowledge of God. And so he said in the garden, people trade judgment for mercy or compassion or acceptance, right? They trade the knowledge of good and evil. They want to be the judges. rather than the knowledge of God. They want to know the rules rather than know the transcendent. This is the mystery of the universe, whatever you want to call it. They'd rather decide who's in and out than simply trust being accepted. Or we might say, we as people continue to choose the knowledge of which soil is best rather than choosing to come to know a farmer who scatters generously. Let me say that one more time. As people, we continue to pursue the knowledge of which soil is best rather than the desire to know a farmer who scatters generously. Is it the parable of the judgment of the soil or the parable of the joyful unconditional farmer? And I can, like, as I've thought about it this week, I have developed a relationship with this farmer. I have to tell you, I've been imagining this farmer locked into his serenity prayer, right? Grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, right? Which is the condition of the soil right now. Can you see him slinging his seed with his earbuds in and jamming? And I think this imagery of the farmer leaves us with this one big question. And I think this is where the whole sermon turns for me. Again, at this point in my life, I preached it differently years ago. I'll preach it differently years from now. But tonight, this point in my life, the question that I'm left with is this: what if the seeds can transform the soil? You know, we read this thing so often. We're kind of like, oh, we should be the farmer and just go sow a bunch of seeds, right? Word or message or whatever, goodness. Or well, we're the soil. We should like work our asses off and transform ourselves into good soil. But what if the seeds can transform the soil? This is one of those gifts. This is called The Last American Man by Elizabeth Gilbert. I was recommended this book. I gave it to my dad last Father's Day, not having read it. He said it's one of his favorite books of all time, and then gave it back to me this Father's Day. So I got to read this to you. So there's a guy in this book. Elizabeth Gilbert writes about a guy called Eustace Conway, and essentially what you've got to know, and this is early in the book. So what you know is that at 17, he decides that the only way that he can be a human in the way that he wants to be a human is to reconnect with nature, live off the land. So he leaves his affluent suburban house and he goes and moves into the woods in North Carolina, and he lives off the land. And he has done that ever since, and it's been several decades. So she meets this guy and writes this book about him. And he's an avid environmentalist, and he thinks that if he can reconnect people with the woods, that it'll save America or save the world. What's said here, I'm gonna read this excerpt. And this is, again, I want you to keep in mind, we're imagining this farmer who sows his seeds, his goodness, so indiscriminately. Here we go. What sets Eustace Conway apart from other environmentalists is the peculiar confidence he has had since his earliest childhood that it is his personal destiny to snap his countrymen out of their sleepwalk. He's always believed that he alone has this power and this responsibility, that he was to be the vessel of change, one man, one vision. And this was his precise vision, that one by one Americans would come to this mystical utopia in the woods called Turtle Island in the mountains of North Carolina. They are under his guidance. They would shed the frailty, ignorance, and pettiness brought about by their contemporary upbringing. Using his charisma as a lure, he would lead people back into the wilderness, uncoil their blindfolds, point them toward the stunning vista of the unspoiled frontier, and say, "Behold." Then he would stand back and watch the awakening. Of course, he knows it's impossible to drag every single American into the woods with him, which is why he is also committed to going out into the world with his own message and delivering the woods directly to the people himself, carrying the very smell of the wilderness in his hair and on his skin and within his words. He would preach and teach his doctrine in every school, at every state fair, in every mall parking lot and gas station he could find. He would passionately speak to any businessman, babysitter, housewife, hooker, millionaire, and crackhead in America. With Eustace's energy and through his example, he has always been certain of it. Americans would gradually be transformed. They would grow and learn and once again be strong and resourceful. Then they would leave Eustace aside and disseminate their newfound knowledge among their brethren. In this evangelical manner, Eustace Conway's vision of perfect concordance with nature would be spread and spread across families, towns, countries, states, until all would be living like Eustace, growing their own food, fabricating our clothing, making fire with 2 sticks, and recognizing our blessed humanity. Thus both our grand nation and our sacred planet would be saved. That was his plan anyway. Audacious? Sure. Still, there is something about this guy. When I read this, and then when I read the story about the farmer, they just clicked. You know, this passion, you know, Eustace has a seed. He has a message. He has a vision. He has a conviction that he can change the soil, that he can change the world, that he, this one person, can go out and change the world. What if the seed can transform the soil? What if we, like him, what if we believe that the seeds, whatever our message, that of God in each of us, listen to me, not my message in you, but your message in you. What if that of God in each of us, whatever you, listen, the language doesn't matter, please, it's the experience, our life passion, the contribution we're supposed to make, whatever God through us for the world means, what if that seed could change the soil? What if the thriving of our spirituality didn't depend on the current state of the soil, but the generosity of the farmer and the unconditional goodness of the seed? What if Jesus believes this? And that's why he tells this story. I mean, the description of the soil is exactly that. It's a description, not a prescription. Maybe the point is that the farmer has faith that the seed changes the soil. So it's not the obligation of the soil to change itself, nor is it the deification of the soil that already happens to bear fruit, nor is it scapegoating and judging all the other forms of soil. What if the whole story is a statement about faith and joy in all soils and in all circumstances, rather than a parable about the judgment of 75% of the path? Do we really think that's what Jesus is doing here? Is shitting on 3/4 of the people? No. This is about the farmer. This is about the goodness of the seed. Listen, if we let neoliberal capitalism teach us farming, we will choose efficiency over humanity every time. And we will continue to create systems that preference and prop up the soil that is already good. Read rich, read white, read powerful. If we let neoliberal capitalism teach us farming, we will choose efficiency over humanity every time, and we will continue to create systems that preference and prop up the soil that is already on top. And when we preference the soil that is already on top, we disadvantage the other soil that might be positively changed by the seeds. What are we saying? Well, we're saying a lot. We're all about to say whatever we want on Zoom. I'm saying that for me tonight, the parable is about a farmer who sows seeds in the same way that we open the table. The seeds are sown for all in the same way that the table is open to all. No one will ever be turned away.